Welcome everyone. My name is Adam Glenn. I'm sorry in advance if I cough or sniffle. I'm getting over a cold. I have taken as much medicine as I feel safe, and I'm going to work through it. There will be a few minutes at the end for questions if you have any, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm fortunate enough to have worked at a few cloud providers. I was a system engineer at Rackspace for a few years. I was a software developer at Amazon AWS for a few years too. Now I am a SRE at RealSelf. We are a company that helps people make decisions about elective procedures. So people will post their stories about having work done, and then they can interact with doctors to ask questions, or they can rate their doctor and how happy they are with the procedure. You can reach me via any of these. I'm on the Slack. I'm hopefully not on the Slack right now, but I will be after this talk. So feel free to reach out if you want to learn more about what we do. We do a lot of cool stuff in AWS, and let's go ahead and talk about CoffeeOps. So what is CoffeeOps? This is actually what my talk is about. CoffeeOps is a meeting of people who are interested in sharing stories and knowledge around DevOps related topics. DevOps is a cultural thing, so it's mostly not technical topics, though we do discuss technology. As of right now, there are 19 CoffeeOps groups listed on the CoffeeOps page, coffeeops.org. And so real quick, who's not sure what I mean when I say DevOps? At least one, okay. So what I'm specifically talking about is an engineering culture where developers who write code are also the ones, are on the same team as the people responsible for running the code. It might be that it's a person with both skills, but it also might be that you just have like both of those roles in the same team and you have the same goals. So our groups are diverse. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next slide. So how did CoffeeOps get started? A woman named Jennifer Davis, who was a co-author on this book, realized that she was getting exposed to amazing people doing amazing things outside her organization at conferences like this one. So what she was trying to recreate was that feeling of, I work with amazing engineers, but there are other people doing really cool things. How do I meet them and have conversations with them about what they're doing? But she wanted it to be an organic conversation and not where somebody's doing a presentation like I'm doing now. And it's nice. Like the way she structured it was meet in the morning so people are fresh. There's a different vibe when you meet in a morning setting than like in an evening setting, which usually turns into a happy hour or drinks. It's not as conducive to having just relaxed conversations about what you're doing, what you're working on. Think of it as part of your work. I actually do when I go to a CoffeeOps meeting. Our last one was yesterday, so I didn't get to go. I wasn't here. But what I usually do is I go to CoffeeOps. I talk about like what I was working on the last 2 weeks, or what I'm going to be working on the next 2 weeks. I try and propose those topics. You'll see how it works in a second. And then I go to work. I walk 10 blocks from where the office is that we meet, and go right to work. People have described it as therapeutic. I will talk about that more later. There is certainly an element to this that feels different from anything else that I've done in terms of going to a meetup or going to a conference. So I joined Seattle CoffeeOps, which is the one that I attend, in June of 2016. There were about 7 or 8 people. We met in the back of a Starbucks. This particular Starbucks in Seattle had like a little room you could reserve, and we wrote our name in the book, and we met there every 2 weeks. This is Doug. He actually started CoffeeOps. And when I attended, there were, like I said, 7 or 8 people. But now we're up, it's much bigger. We're up to about 30 to 40 people. They told me over 40 people came yesterday. We have 170 active members. I don't know exactly how meetup.com calculates that. I assume it's people like RSVPing yes or no, that sort of thing. We have over 1,000 members in total in our group. And we have 7 leaders, of which I am one. I help facilitate those conversations at the meetups. So who comes? Who shows up? We firmly believe that whoever comes is the right people, and the conversations that we have are the right conversations. There's not a prescription to this for our group. It's very much an organic thing. As I talk about the format, I think it's on the next slide, yes. you'll see like there's no structure to this other than this is how we start it. And then it kind of ends up being whatever it is that day. So we invite anybody to come. It's important for us to have not just diversity of job descriptions, but people and their backgrounds. We want everybody to show up, bring their voice, and hopefully they'll be heard. And this is a good representation, but it is certainly not everybody. The only thing that we ask is if you're somebody like a recruiter or a hiring manager, like leave your sales pitch at home. This is about community and not about, poaching somebody, though that does happen. So how do we run it? We use what's called a lean coffee format. If you want to learn more about that, it's on leancoffee.org. It is basically this here. And Chef in Seattle is nice enough to provide us a meeting space. So every 2 weeks, we show up for an hour and a half. We write down our topics on Post-it notes, and then we go around and introduce yourself and your topic. And then we vote. And the way voting works is that everybody just takes a Sharpie, they get 2 votes, they write on each of the Post-it notes that they want to talk about. And then after we've given enough time for people to do that, we go through and we sort all of them. And we basically do a Kanban where we have everything that we're going to do, what we're currently talking about, and the topics that we've finished. So how do we go through them? Each topic gets 8 minutes, and then we do a vote. Voting is very simple. It is either thumbs up, I'd like to keep talking about this, to the side, I don't really care either way. Thumbs down, I'd like to talk about the next topic. You're not voting on the person, you're just voting on the conversation. Maybe it's not something you're getting anything out of and you'd like to move on. If we do continue, we put like another 4 minutes on the timer, and then we vote again at the end of that 4 minutes. And we keep going until we run out of time or there's no more interest in the topic. So 15 minutes before the end of CoffeeOps, we stop. We talk about our takeaways. If I was going to use an example, say I brought up monitoring, something that I was worrying about, like application monitoring. How am I going to do that? And somebody's like, oh, Prometheus does this really cool thing. You should go check that out. My takeaway might be like, I really like to talk about monitoring. I will go learn more about Prometheus and ask more questions next time. That sort of thing. So we had to scale it a bit as we grew. When we started and it was 7 or 8 people, it was pretty easy to just talk. But some things started happening as we grew. We wrote a code of conduct as a statement of our culture. It lets people know the space that we're trying to provide them and like what they can expect from our group. And it was an important milestone, I thought, because when we wrote ours in Seattle, the woman who started it, Jennifer, liked the idea so much that she stole it and used it for San Francisco also. So I think it was time for all of us to have one. We grew large enough. Here's a map of Seattle. You can't see it on this map, but to the east is Bellevue across Lake Washington. Anyone who had to drive from Bellevue to Seattle to go to this, like they did it because they enjoyed the talks, but it's also kind of a pain. Like any big city, sometimes the commute isn't worth it. So people asked, could we start another one? And one of our members started up the East Side CoffeeOps. So now we have 2. People can go to both. Like there's no fee to go to either one, so you just show up. It's just a matter of preference. And we start by splitting into smaller groups. When everybody shows up, the 40 people yesterday got counted off, and we would go like around the room, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and everybody gets assigned to a table. And we break up into tiny groups that are more manageable. So how do we communicate as a group? Outside of the actual meetings, we send welcome messages manually through meetup.com to people when they join. I'll talk a little bit about that more because there's some issues with that. We use the scheduling feature of meetup.com. We rely heavily on Slack and Twitter, mostly Slack, but we chat with Slack. We share things, and also topics continue on into Slack later. I'll show that in a second too. And we have a GitHub repo that we use for like template emails and the code of conduct and other things in the future. So some of the other ideas that we've tried, we tried making all of the topics, like have everybody come in, we all write our topics down, we vote on them as one giant group of 30 people. Some issues with that came up in that it took too long to go through everybody to introduce their topic. It ended up taking the first 30 to 40 minutes of the meeting. We didn't have as much time to talk. felt kind of rushed. But also, the person whose topic it was may not be sitting at your table, and there may not be interest from the other people who are at that table to actually speak about a topic. So it messed with the flow, and we decided that we would switch to break into groups, then make your topics and introduce yourselves, and that way everybody's at the table. We tried all tables with the same topics, like I said. That didn't really work. Having short demos before the meetup. This was something that Doug wanted to try. It was a cool idea. I did a demo of how to pick a lock. I did like 5 minutes of here's how you pick a lock. I let a couple people try it out. There were some other demos, and there was interest in them, but there weren't enough people willing to give them. So it didn't really last. But it's something we would do in the future if people were interested. So my point is, don't be afraid to experiment if you decide to do this. There's really no right or wrong way, and CoffeeOps doesn't actually tell you how to do it. The meetings are different depending on the location. So what are some examples of topics that people bring? These are pictures that I've taken and some of the topics we've had at tables. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I do want to talk about how do we level up our new engineers or each other, because a lot of these questions end up being like, how do I grow as an engineer? How do I learn this new technology? I've been put on a dev team and I need to do system engineering, or vice versa. Like, to me, it sounds like a lot of the topics that are brought up indicate that a mentor program would be a great thing for us to start. We haven't done that yet, but it is something that I've been thinking about. We had the idea for these pictures actually came from somebody who's only been to a few meetings that I know of. But he said when we broke into tables and he was missing topics from the other tables, he's like, I'd love to know what everybody else is talking about. And I was like, of course, like everybody would want to know what the topics are at other tables so that they can, for me, it ends up being a reading list. Like, what are things that I want to check out? Oh, somebody was talking about that. But I came up with the idea of taking the pictures and posting them in our Slack. And so people will continue the conversation. Like, someone might ask, oh, what do you want in a manager? That sounds interesting. What did that conversation end up being like? And they might talk about it all day on Slack. So conversation continues. We also had 2 women come who were just out of a boot camp, and their only question was like, how do I make myself more attractive as a candidate to the employers that I'm interviewing with? That was a great conversation. As somebody who does interviews, I wanted to flip it around and ask, like, how do I, as an employer, make it more obvious that I'm open to you as a candidate so you don't feel like the bar's too high, or this isn't the right company because I don't know machine learning well enough. Like, what do I do to make it more appealing? And then we've also had other topics come up that are, like HashiCorp Vault has come up, I think 3 or 4 times. It's a way of doing secret management. Everybody seems really interested in it. Nobody's actually done it, or one person has done it, and you can't really have a conversation with just one person. So it's things like that where I kind of look at that as an indicator of I should probably go learn more about this or try and do it at real self, and then come back to the group with, here's what I learned. Like, this is what's great, this is what's terrible, that sort of thing. So why do people come? I come because I've made friends. I have certainly learned new technology or gotten excited about new technology by showing up. And those learnings have made a difference in my career. Like, I'm a better engineer at real self because of the things that I've learned from the CoffeeOps group. It energizes me in a way that few other things have. Like, every 2 weeks, I have this thing that I'm looking forward to. I really enjoy meeting new people or just chatting with old friends who are there. And the topics may even be the same from week to week, but it's still exciting because it's different people at the table. After I proposed this talk, one of my CoffeeOps topics was, why do you come? And these were the answers that I got. I'm not going to go through them all, but I do want to say the 2 that really resonated with me were, it's not like listening to somebody talk. Like, that's what you're doing now, right? I'm talking to you about this thing. It's not really interactive until we get to the question section. And CoffeeOps has a very different feel. Like, it is totally interactive. If you've ever just grabbed somebody in the hallway of a conference and started chatting, that's a lot more what it feels like. Like you just learn who they are, what they're working on, what they're excited about, that sort of thing. And then a CTO who came really loved that we talk about the consequences. I know a lot of things that I've sat through in a conference, somebody's telling you about, I used this new technology and then everything was awesome. And that's probably true. Like there are many benefits to switching to something new, but what were the pains that they learned along the way? Like how did they cope with scaling issues or whatever they ran into? And also, I should mention, you can find your next coworker at a CoffeeOps for sure. One of the members of our team who joined is a co-leader with me. He just joined RealSelf like a month or two ago. So you can definitely vet people by learning who they are and interacting with them, and would they be a good coworker, and then inviting them to come to your company. So what can you do next? Form a meetup, set up a Slack, GitHub repo, write a code of conduct, or steal ours. Like it's open source, it's on the web. Invite your friends. And one of the things that Jennifer told me about was that she would host CoffeeOps every time she came to a conference. She thought that was a good way to kind of get it socialized and get it started. So she would host CoffeeOps wherever she was. And then if you want to add your CoffeeOps, if you decide to start one, Austin does not have one. I don't think Houston has, no, Houston doesn't have one. The closest one I think is Denver. So if you would like to start one wherever you're from, like please do. And if you want to add it to the CoffeeOps website, you just do a pull request, and then they'll accept you adding it to the website. It's a GitHub Pages website. So I am doing a CoffeeOps tomorrow in this room during breakfast. If you're interested, if this is something you want to try, I got Post-it notes and Sharpies. Like I blew the budget on Post-it notes and Sharpies, and I'm happy to host one. It'll have to be shorter than an hour and a half because we've got speakers in the morning. So show up here at 8 o'clock. We'll probably wrap up around 1:45, and yeah, that's it. Anybody have questions?
Thank you.
You have one?
You guys initially 70 people. Was it just like coworkers or friends, or like how did the initial group start?
So the question was, how did the initial group start? Was it coworkers and friends? The group when I started was mostly coworkers, but it was from a few different companies. I think there were people from Nordstrom and a couple other companies. I don't remember exactly. And I think when Doug started it, Doug worked at Nordstrom. I think that was kind of how he started it. Was Nordstrom people, and they kept socializing it, and then more people showed up. But I'm not positive on that.
So I noticed you comment about recruiters and job seekers, and it seems that you're not, let's say, you don't want this connection to happen within CoffeeOps, at least not formally.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that? Because some meetups that we do here actually do try to sponsor this connection. So.
Okay, so the question was around, we do allow recruiters to show up and we have job seekers, and how do we make sure that they get the connections that they need? Is that paraphrased correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's two ways. I think it's totally fine for somebody to say, I'm a recruiter. When I introduce myself, I tell them my title and where I work. So the recruiters are free to introduce themselves, and the job seekers will find them. We also have in our Slack a jobs channel, and I always mention to people, like, if you're looking, we post jobs in there all the time. I know I've posted like 4 or 5. And we have people who don't want to come to a CoffeeOps, but do want to recruit to our group. And what I usually do is post their job descriptions in our Slack so that they can still reach the people, they just don't have to show up. Any other questions?
So it seems like you sort of talked about getting this like magical combination of not really having restrictions on who shows up or what you talk about, but still getting relevant group-wide topics. I'm curious if you had to like make that happen, or if you just got lucky and usually the stuff people want to talk about is a fair bit of interest to most people.
So the question is, I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Yeah, I guess it's just, do you do anything explicitly to make sure that the topics that get brought up and become, discussed are of interest to everyone?
Oh, okay.
How broad your membership is?
Yes. the question is around topics, like topic generation. Do I do anything to kind of make sure that the topics that are proposed are good ones? The answer is not really. As the leader of one of the tables, which is usually how my role ends up being on the day of CoffeeOps, is I lead one of the tables. I make sure the conversations stay, like they keep moving, and if I notice that there's a lull in the conversation, say we've only been like 5 minutes into a topic, nobody really seems interested, I'll say, oh, let's go ahead and vote. But I don't really curate the topics. I might take some that are similar and like collapse them into one topic, and that might give them a lot more votes because people voted on both, but that's about it. Any other questions? Cool. All right.
Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much.